Good morning. Welcome to Power Engineers Leveraging Cityworks to Manage Your Vertical Assets webinar. This morning, we have developed a panel of industry experts to talk about vertical assets. Our goals for this discussion include hearing from 4 experts that had implemented, designed, and developed Cityworks to manage vertical assets. Since each deployment is different, we are going to have them describe their approach and the challenges they had and provide tips and advice for those thinking of using Cityworks to manage their vertical assets. We're also going to have an open dialogue and discussion on how vertical asset challenges can be met and overcome. As we proceed today, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A function of WebEx and submit your questions to the host and panelists. We have a segment in the program where we will try to answer all of your questions. One last thing, this webinar is being recorded. I'd like to introduce myself and our panel. I'm Bill Hoisington, a business development manager at Power Engineers, and I'll be the host of the webinar today. I have with me today Jana Weir from the Light and Power Department at the City of Independence, Missouri. Jana is a systems program supervisor at Independence Power and Light. A software engineer by training, Jana has administered the electric utility software applications for nearly a decade to provide the City of Independence, Missouri with reliable electric power by maximizing their business processes. Hey, Jana. We also have Tim Schonberg from Milwaukee County. Tim is an application architect at Milwaukee County, where he leads the Cityworks team, which supports 9 different departments. Before this position, Tim was a GIS analyst working with his team at Milwaukee County and Power Engineers to build the enterprise GIS database that supports the vertical asset deployment of Cityworks. Also today, we have Becky Tamashasky from Cityworks, a Trimble company. Becky is the Vice President of Product Vision and Engineering at Cityworks. She brings more than 20 years of experience to her role where she leads the direction of GIS-centric solutions for local government, public works, and utility organizations. Finally, we have Lee Halbrook, the Cityworks Department Manager at Power Engineers. Lee has extensive experience serving as a geospatial and asset management system professional in the public sector, utility, and forestry industries. Lee provides project management, software deployment, consulting, and technical support services using Esri, ArcGIS, and Trimble's Cityworks solution. Lee has worked on dozens of vertical asset projects for a variety of asset owners, including treatment plants, building facilities, zoos, jails, and electric generation plants. Before we start talking about using Cityworks to manage vertical assets, I want to cover what a vertical asset is. I think of a vertical asset as a piece of equipment within a building or facility that is often comprised of multiple components. They are different than linear assets such as water distribution networks or sewer collection networks that have traditionally been modeled in the GIS and tract and work management systems. Vertical assets typically have Z components to them, and they can be dispersed on different building floors. They are often composed of related objects and components. A great example of this would be a pump and motor and the relationship between the two. These models typically have greater complexity to them than a water network. And for example, think about all the assets that make up a wastewater treatment plant. You have all the infrastructure, the buildings, the pumps, the motors, the electrical equipment, the sensors that can control the plant. There could be hundreds of different asset types. All right. Next, we have a poll question. We want to gauge who we have in the audience right now. So if you can go ahead and answer your poll. What vertical asset types are you currently managing? Buildings, pump stations, wastewater treatment plants, water filter plants, substations, other, or none? Okay. A lot of people managing substations, a few pump stations and buildings, and 1 treatment plant and a water filtration plant. And a few of you aren't implementing or managing any asset vertical assets right now. So I hope this webinar is very informative for you. Next, we're going to hear from our panelists now. First off, Jana is going to give a brief overview of her Cityworks environment and the approach she uses at the City of Independence. Jana?
Thanks, Bill. The power and light domains I oversee are part of a larger citywide enterprise Cityworks environment. The enterprise solution includes 6 active domains. At Power and Light, we occupy 2 of those domains, one for transmission and distribution and one for generation. At Power and Light, we're managing all assets related to providing power from generation to the service meter, including the assets contained within our power plant, 15 substations, and 2 solar farms. At the power plant, we're utilizing piping and instrumentation diagrams as the source, as shown on the slide. These scanned images are displayed on a map with digitized point features. This solution gives our users a familiar context and is displayed for them by system. A customized inbox supports the display of multiple asset types in the same inbox panel, which allows all assets within a given system to be displayed together. This approach gives users the option to access their assets either via maps in a view or through inbox asset list.
Thanks, Jana. Next, we want to hear from Tim at Milwaukee County.
Yeah, so before we implemented Cityworks, we were looking for a solution to improve our processes across 7 different departments that all kind of had their own facilities groups, everywhere from our zoo to our parks department to our jail. And so we followed kind of a map-first approach. So we followed Esri's facility information system data model to structure our data. And then we focus, like I said, we focused on the map. So right away we introduced ArcGIS collector apps to gather the data. And what this did for us is it allowed us to provide a visual representation of all of our GIS assets up front. And since we broke it down, you know, how you see on the screen by different facility types, we were able to gather a wider range of attributes on these types of assets and then create the work orders and service requests in Cityworks based on the specific department.
Great. Thanks, Tim. Next, I think we have Lee Halbrook, who's going to talk about common treatment plant approaches that we've used before.
Thanks, Bill.
Lee?
Thanks. So what I want to provide is a summary of the approaches we typically see for vertical asset management in treatment plants. And these can be either wastewater treatment plants or a drinking water plant. Both commonly use this similar approach. For example, we're currently working with Jefferson County, Alabama on a project that will use the approach where we'll be implementing Cityworks for their 9 wastewater treatment plants and around 170 pump stations. In that project, we're beginning with a review of their existing data. So we're looking at existing SCADA information or their GIS or an existing work order management system to try and see what type of assets are in place. And then spend the time to develop a geodatabase design model. And this is going to be based really like a common hierarchical model like you see in the screen here, with relationships between the main buildings or process systems, so whether it's the basin or a building or a tank, and the related equipment like pumps or actuators or motors. And this is a pretty common approach. Maybe a little bit different here is that we'll then be performing condition assessments and scoring for all these assets, and then using that information to generate business risk exposure and risk scores. And our goal here is to be able to see what condition these assets are in, and then develop preventative maintenance configuration in Cityworks based on what risk we're seeing. Now, I understand that this type of elaborate on-site inspection and assessment may not always be possible, but the end result is a typical Cityworks approach, primarily based on cyclical preventative maintenance inspections and work orders that are scheduled based either on those manufacturers' recommendations or really what you're seeing in those risk scores. And then this information is presented to those end users with a saved search and an inbox, and we can build those inboxes and searches either based on organization. For example, show me all the work orders for the electricians, maybe by location, show me all the work orders or inspections for a particular clarifier or building, or even down to the asset type, show me all those that are related to these pumps. While maybe not using detailed condition inspections, all of them kind of result in the same kind of approach.
Thanks, Lee. Next, we have Becky's going to talk about new software that is changing how vertical assets can be managed using ArcGIS Indoors and Cityworks. Becky?
Thanks, Bill. So as many of you on the call may or may not know, Cityworks is a Esri GIS-centric application. So built solely on the Esri platform, when Esri comes along with new technology and new applications, we're able to go ahead and develop off of those to provide that functionality as a capability within our solution. And that's the approach that we took with Indoors. When we first became familiar with the application, we worked with the Esri Indoors team to start to identify some of those workflows where we could start to have handoffs and consolidation between Indoors and Cityworks to provide a really seamless experience for those mutual users. And that's what we've done. So we've gone ahead and we've worked with that team, as I mentioned, and provided the ability to have the workflows that are started within Indoors mobile app actually kick off activities within Cityworks and also be able to view those Cityworks activities that are taking place. And you can see that image here on the right side of the screen. That's showing ArcGIS Indoors mobile app. And within there, you can see that listing of all the Cityworks service requests that are taking place, showing the symbology that Cityworks users are accustomed to have that consistency for users between being in the back office and being out in the field and using Indoors. The look and feel stays the same, and they can still access their assignments. That aspect of it is really important for us because we're able to go ahead and take that architecture from Indoors and have that representation of the vertical assets. And you have the option, it can be 2D, it can be 3D, but there's a lot of tools that have been built specifically to manage those vertical asset workflows with Indoors. And we're able to take that, bring it into Cityworks, and then just extend it and provide our standard activity approach for the maintenance management, asset management, and even, we're headed towards permitting as well, and having that as part of the solution. So we can go ahead and use that to allow crews to quickly identify where those assets are located. And, when you're looking at a treatment plant or a distribution system, any of the large power generation plants, and you've got a listing of multiple pumps or multiple pieces of equipment in a list, it's sometimes harder to identify which of those are the correct one where the maintenance is taking place or viewing that work history. And having a tool like Indoors as part of that tied into Cityworks really gives those users the ability to be efficient and quick in the field with capturing and identifying where that data is.
Great. And I think we have some example videos here, Becky.
Oh, great. So this is actually Indoors mobile. And you can see here, we've got those Cityworks activities, service request, work order, inspection. The user can click on the inspections and service requests in their inbox and see that listing. They can click on the individual activities and actually see where they're located on the map. And from there, they're able to go in and actually view those details that came across from Cityworks. And this is part of, just using Cityworks ERL, which is basically our Cityworks feature service that we're able to bring into the map. And actually, that's how we're exposing it here. And then from there, they're able to actually go ahead and initiate those new activities. And because Cityworks uses Esri single sign-on for HOL or portal, it immediately brings those users over into Cityworks, logs them into the system without additional steps. And from there, they can go through and identify the type of work activities that need to be created as a follow-up, perhaps, to that service request that they saw that came in, or maybe to create new work order types or inspections that are taking place. They can do the regular functionality within Cityworks to go through and track their equipment, labor, material, have that associated back to those work assets. And then all that information, as it's being updated in Cityworks, it's all going to be available back to those users as well within ArcGIS Indoors. And so it's a continuous system there of providing that information back between Cityworks, Indoors. New activities created on both sides are immediately available and displayed for those users. So there's a continuous sharing of the data that's being updated. And it's, a lot of that's due to the way that Cityworks uses the Esri platform. So being able to use those Esri web maps, those users' identities are, consistent across both systems. So the immediate updating of those activities is available on both sides.
Awesome. Yeah, that looks really cool. We also have another example here. Let me start.
And so this one is actually from our client, City of Raleigh, North Carolina. And so I mentioned, they can be doing Indoors in 2D or 3D. And there's a number of tools and workflows that the Indoors team has created that are really specific. And one of those is a floor switcher. So you can see here, they're using their treatment plant data and they're doing it in 2D, but they're using the floor switcher widget, which we've actually embedded within Cityworks. Both of our map viewers and JavaScript 3x and JavaScript 4x have this available to them. And from there, they're able to go ahead and navigate and filter out the different floors, the correct assets, make the selections, and then from there, go ahead and create the work orders. And it's, all the information flows just as it would for the rest of the regular Cityworks work process. But it allows them a way to actually get started. Even before they have like all the 3D information available, they're able to start doing this in 2D and incorporate those tools that are part of the Indoors solution natively within Cityworks. And you can see here, they're just showing how they've gone through and created that work order, but then they're also able to go through and search for it and immediately shows out the work that was created. And then from there, they're able to really enable more of that data collection and the activity association and the work history that's part of that infrastructure.
Great. Thanks for providing that great overview, Beck.
I need to give a shout out there to Chad Foley at the City of Raleigh, North Carolina for providing that for me. That was all his work.
All right. Yeah, looks great. Next, we're going to open up the panel to a few questions. And before we do that, I do just want to remind any of our attendees, if you have any questions for our panel, please use the Q&A box and just write in your question. We have a segment coming up where we'll try to answer any of your questions. So I do have a few questions for our panel. And the first question coming up is, what is your most critical step to consider when implementing Cityworks for facilities and vertical assets? And I think I'd like Tim to see if you could kick this off.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. So as I said, we implemented across 7 departments and we really wanted consistency. So I'd say the most critical step up front was developing the GIS data model to fit all of our department's needs. And then, like I said, the work can be tailored to each department, but the GIS data model we thought was important to keep consistent across all of the departments.
Okay. Hey, Jenna, I'd like to get your thoughts.
For us, it was finding a solution that was relatable for our staff. We took the approach to mimic our plant operational display panels.
Okay. Lee, any thoughts?
I think what we really strive to emphasize up front really is to determine your priorities with respect to work and asset management. And really there is no one configuration for our vertical assets going to really fit all situations. For example, if the focus is on maybe work management, reactive work management, and supporting your field user, that might be maybe one priority. Or maybe your focus is you've got an elaborate SCADA system and you're going to build an integration from SCADA into Cityworks. Maybe that's going to be your important priority. Or maybe you're more focused on comprehensive asset management and moving towards risk-based, data-driven approach. Each one of these is going to require a slightly different configuration and approach to both the geodatabase and within the configuration of Cityworks. And I think that's what you're seeing from our panelists, is there's just slightly different flavors of similar situations.
Great. And Becky, I'll give you an opportunity. Comment?
I would actually kind of expand on what Lee had to say. I think it's really important to understand what you want as the outcome of deploying Cityworks with the vertical assets. Is it in relation to, and just beyond the typical work management and maintenance of the infrastructure, but are there asset management goals that you have in place? Are there regulatory requirements, and making sure that the data that's being configured helps to support those needs down the road? And thinking about also the way additional applications are going to be consuming some of the data. If you're looking to understand the risk and consequence of failure of assets within your vertical assets, vertical facilities, making sure that you have that information that's being captured that feeds into those other applications like Cityworks Operational Insights to develop those strategies and support them, and not having to, you can always circle back and make those modifications, but it's just something to think about at the front end is, what do you want as that outcome from this implementation?
All right, that's a great point. Got another question here. Let's see if we can, what surprised you the most during your implementation? Tim, I'll start with you again.
Okay. I would say the adaptation of our staff. Up front, we were a little concerned about, using new technology with our trade staff, but most employees adapted relatively quickly, and we actually had a few champions, in each department that really helped their teams learn. So I think that was probably the most surprising thing to us.
Jana, you have anything surprising?
Just like Tim, our adaptability of new users to an application was pretty surprising. In addition to that, their willingness to deconstruct their legacy systems and processes and workflows and take ownership of the new tools definitely was not something that we had anticipated at the beginning.
Okay. Becky, are you seeing anything with the implementation of Indoors in Cityworks?
You know, in a way, it's reassuring and maybe surprising is the feedback that we get from some of the crews. For example, like with Raleigh, you know, the treatment plant crews said that they really, like once it was all implemented, the feedback was they really appreciated having a system that truly showed them the data as they visualize it, and then also having quick access to work history and other activities, planned activities while they're out there in the plants, and having that easy correlation to the equipment that they're looking at while they're standing there.
Great. Lee, what have you seen?
I think what's really been the most interesting is both the level of complexity that we've been able to model and help manage with Cityworks. You're almost able to define a model and support it with anything. If you look at who's on the panel, we've got electric generation plants or water treatment plants or sewer treatment plants, pump stations, elaborate facilities and courthouses, jails and zoos. So that's been really interesting. And I think, but at the same time, there's really a set of very similar characteristics about all those. Yeah, there's different equipment, but in general, they're the same system types. It's electrical, it's plumbing, it's HVAC, it's the building and shell. So, you know, really being able to see how flexible of a solution we can build for each client.
Okay, great. Next, I have a question for Jana and Tim. What one thing would you change if you had to do this all over again? And I'll start with you, Jana.
I definitely would have dug deeper into the staff's ability to view their assets in a single panel by location. Unfortunately, this is one of those learning takeaways that you only discover through the development process. And we were fortunate enough to have Power identify a solution in pretty short order that provided exactly what the users needed. They didn't need to be able to see things necessarily by separate asset type, but they needed to be able to see it all grouped together by what assets were related to a single system.
Okay. Tim, do you have anything?
Yeah, so quite simply, I would say hardware. So early on in our project, we purchased Windows tablets for all of our users without really weighing the options. And so we kind of rushed the selection of the devices. Eventually, we've now switched to iOS devices and laptops, which have been much better, much more user friendly. So that's definitely one thing I would have changed.
Okay. All right. We have another poll coming up. We're going to talk a little bit about mobile. So if you can answer this question, are you using a mobile solution to manage your vertical assets? It looks like a few are using Cityworks iOS, and a few are using another system, and a couple not using any mobile devices here at all. Okay, and that brings us a kind of a question for our panel. What are your users, or are your users accessing Cityworks from a mobile device? And if so, what Cityworks app are you using, and what type of field device is being used? And Tim, I think we'll start with you here.
Yeah, so do you want to play that video and I can watch
Yeah,
through
you
that?
got a video here. So.
Yeah. So this is actually on a desktop computer, but this is what we use on our iPads here. So this is Cityworks Respond, and what I'm showing here is filling out an inspection from the map that was already existing. It's a recurring inspection on our fire extinguishers at our courthouse. So here you can see that the mount broke off the wall. We need to replace it immediately or fix it immediately. And so what you can actually do then is jump over and create a work order from that inspection so that it's a related work order to the inspection. And so here you can see I'm going to grab the same fire extinguisher from the map, select it on the work order, and then fill out some general information for the field worker that's going to that this is going to be submitted to. And the field worker, once they get this work order, they're actually going to be able to relate back to the inspection if they want to see more details about it.
Okay.
And so there, I'm just saying, real quickly, replace the fire extinguisher mount as soon as possible, create work order, and that'll land in whatever field worker's view, I submitted it to right away so that they can take care of that.
Right. Great. It looks pretty slick. Jana, are you using mobile at all?
Yep. Inside the power plant, staff are using their phones and stationary computers. They primarily use just the Office application of Cityworks.
Okay.
Out at substations, they're using Cityworks Office or tablet mode on a mix of iPads and laptops, similar to our field staff.
Okay. Lee, what are you seeing at treatment plants?
Seeing kind of a combination, a little bit of Cityworks mobile so that they can use it in that disconnected mode, which is often needed when you're down in the lower levels of a cement tomb-like structure of a treatment plant. Similar to Tim, we've seen some transitions from Windows devices to iOS, but we've also seen some pretty good success of Windows devices for those folks who still need to use some Cityworks Office. So yeah, mobile for some of those disconnected areas, and Office when they're looking at some more of the access to almost all the elaborate forms that they need to on Cityworks.
Okay. Becky, you have any thoughts on what your clients are using or insights?
It seems to be predominantly iPads and iPhones for the disconnected reason, being able to use native apps to go disconnected because so many of those areas have poor connectivity. But we do see more clients standardizing on the iOS platform. So that's been fairly consistent. We've seen quite a few transition from other platforms to iOS as well.
Right. Yep. I think I've seen that too. All right. Next, let's talk a little bit about building your GIS for your asset management or vertical assets. Is it necessary to have all your assets captured in the GIS before you go live? Jana, you have any thoughts on that?
It's not necessary, but identifying what asset types you plan to do work activities on in advance does lend to more refined work orders and inspection activities. It also allows for related objects. That helps build a more cohesive asset management approach, in the long run, without having to do a lot of rework.
Gotcha. Tim, how did you start?
Yeah, I agree with Jana. It's not necessary to have all of your assets captured. Our goal was we managed a little over 500 buildings, so our goal was to try to get at least the building footprints collected, and if possible, the floor plans. If we could find a CAD file that we had to transfer it over to GIS, we would do that. And so if we were to try to collect every asset, it would have taken an incredible amount of time, and we're still collecting assets every day, so it's definitely not required.
Okay. Becky, any thoughts?
I would kind of second what Jana had to say in terms of, I don't think it's necessary to have all of your assets captured before you go live. I do think, though, it is fairly important to have your model mapped out before you go live and understand the type of assets and the type of attributes. And then we have tools where, with our mobile apps, you can app link out to collector. So we have some customers who, they don't have all their infrastructure captured yet. And so they'll, in the process of doing a work order or doing an inspection, they'll switch over to collector, capture that asset, capture the point, the attributes, come back to Cityworks. It's there on the web map. They can attach it to the activity that they're working on. And now they've kind of killed two birds with one stone as part of a single workflow.
Gotcha. Lee, what have you seen at our clients?
Yeah, important to really flesh out that data model at the beginning, and we always try to look around to see what data is available. So I would encourage, if you know you won't be able to get all your assets, start to look at existing data, like we've been doing lately, is looking into SCADA systems or existing GIS or work order systems, and even just start now collecting the basics, even if you need to do it in spreadsheets to start to get an idea of what assets you have out there. That'll get you a step ahead when you decide to dive into it with Cityworks.
Right, that makes sense. One final question here before we move on to our, we have a few questions coming in from our attendees, and just a reminder, from your attendees. If you have any questions, just put it in the Q&A, and we're going to get to that next. So how has the system and new processes been accepted by the end users? What has been unexpected wins, and what have been the struggles? And let's just hear from Tim and Jana on this. Tim, you have any thoughts?
Yeah. As I said, the acceptance of our end users actually surprised us, especially once we got the new devices in their hands, the new iOS devices. Some unexpected wins were how quickly we were able to start reporting on our data. We're using Power BI to track KPIs for our facilities groups, and they're actually reviewing the Cityworks data every single week to make their decisions of what they should be working on. One struggle that we've had is we didn't get the GIS group as involved as we would have liked to. And so they're a little hesitant to let us use some of the Cityworks functionality, such as updating the GIS assets automatically when Cityworks work is completed. So I would just say it's really important to get your GIS team involved up front.
Okay. Jana?
For us, we've had very successful deployments as we rolled out the system. Part of that is attributed to end user engagement during the development process. We had pretty extensive meetings and wanted to hear their feedback since they're the users, not us. Our users, though, they have constantly been looking at different ways to move work activities into Cityworks. They like having one cohesive system that they can have access to everything. The biggest struggle for us was connectivity inside of the power plant and substation buildings. Those things are just like a bin and a bolt.
Okay.
So we definitely had some struggles there and some challenges with getting, Wi-Fi access a little bit more accessible inside the building.
Okay. Gotcha. Lee, do you have any thoughts on what we've seen?
Yeah, as far as acceptance by end users, I think Bill, you and I both, and even Becky have seen where you get into some of these initial meetings, and sometimes management will be hesitant about a certain solution or a certain business process. And what we've seen is that in the end, it's the end users are really able to adopt quite easily, easier than a lot of their teams expected. Similar with the kind of struggles, maybe it's hardware or connectivity, which can really, if it's not taken care of quickly, can produce maybe a bad impression based on software when it really is a hardware device.
Okay, great. Becky, any final thoughts on this one?
I'd agree with a lot of what the panel has already said as well. In terms of, the connectivity is the biggest issue in almost all of these vertical asset deployments, because they're all, it's very different than being out in the field hitting a street light. The buildings are pretty thick and pretty solid and the connection is poor. But I do think one of the things that's been really exciting to see is, kind of along the lines of what Lee had mentioned earlier on, the way that the functionality can be applied across so many different types of vertical assets. It's not just limited to buildings and facilities or, just airports or anything like that. It's anything that the model can incorporate. So there's a lot of flexibility there. And it's one of those things where, we always have our concepts in our mind as we're starting to put together the software and putting together the integrations. And then customers continually surprise us in a great way with the way that they take it and make it their own and extend it beyond what we even expected.
Gotcha. And I think this leads into, there's a couple questions in here that are coming in from our attendees about the Wi-Fi connections. And I guess, Tim, I know you had some issues there and some adjustments you've made for getting Wi-Fi connections and even your cellular connections. Can you talk about a little bit about how you overcame those and what your process was?
Yeah. So we normally have been using just a 4G data connection for our parks department, our zoo, but we did have some connectivity issues in the basements of our courthouse and our jail especially. And so we actually have secure Wi-Fi in those places now that we're able to connect to. And I don't remember exactly when, but somewhere along the process, we set up some better Wi-Fi in those areas for our staff, and that seemed to fix our issues.
Right. And wasn't there an issue too? You switched providers too?
Oh yeah. Way early in the stage, we actually switched over to Verizon, and that helped a lot as well.
Okay, great. And there's another question here, I think that's kind of aligned for you, Jana, is, how did you solve that connectivity issue in the plants? Is that using mobile devices, or you still struggling with that?
We have, for their phones, so whether or not it was a cellular signal or even trying to connect to the corporate Wi-Fi, just adding additional access points and, beefing up the Wi-Fi hardware that was at the actual buildings. We also have to have Wi-Fi for our Radley barcode scanning system. So
Okay.
it was a pretty critical connection for us to have out there.
Right. Yeah, I know I have one client that just recently has put in cellular repeaters in their treatment plant to get connectivity to their phones. Okay. We have another question here that came in from one of our attendees, and I think this is going to go to you, Jana. Would it be possible to show an example or further detail of a system diagram representation rather than the map representation? Can you talk about those pin drawings and how we did that?
Yeah, so we scanned in, we received from staff the training manual that they use on the floor. And that's their reference book at every single system that they do work on. And so we took those control screens and scanned those in as a PDF, and then we overlaid them to the buildings, kind of displayed them out a little bit so that they had some spatial representation to the local area. And then we went through and took each of the map points and digitized those on top of where that system was visually on the PDF drawing that we had digitized.
Okay.
So, if somebody wants to see something more on that, then we would definitely be open to displaying that. We do the same thing with our substations since they're not modeled in the GIS.
Okay, gotcha. Looks like we have another question here, and it's just want to frame this up. Have you looked at or have any plans for doing 3D with your vertical assets? And I guess, Jana, we'll start with you.
We're definitely interested in a 2D or 3D type of option. Our substations are not currently modeled with a visual map point. It's just an overlay of the same scanned in drawings. So that is one of our next phases that we're looking to do, is to get some intelligent interactive assets managed out at the substation itself, which includes, the overhead underground relationships and all of that.
Okay. Tim?
We're interested in it. We haven't done a lot of looking into it yet in the Cityworks world. We did build, using our data that we put together for Cityworks in GIS. We did build 3D models of our buildings in GIS, kind of just to see what the capabilities were, I guess. But we are interested in looking into that in Cityworks someday.
Okay. Becky, any thoughts on 3D and what Cityworks is doing with it?
So there's a few things. For one, I think the email went out last night. Cityworks 15.7 just was released. And with 15.7, there's support for a Z attribute on all the Cityworks work orders. So we're able to start showing those activities in relation to a Z context when they're being located within a building or facility. We also have added floor and level attributes to all the work activities so that those can also be represented and shown correctly in terms of which floor of the building based off of the information that's being tracked in the GIS as attributes of those floor features also. And then coming later, we will have 3D support within Cityworks, a 3D map viewer that'll be incorporated within the application as well.
Okay. Lee, what are you seeing on the pilot or the project level for 3D?
Yeah, we're really seeing a lot of interest on 3D on the electric side in substation design, kind of as Jana mentioned, and even some research and development we've done at Power with using LiDAR data to scan existing substations and then model and capture that substation information in GIS so that then it can become part of an asset management system. And even with the COVID situation right now, excuse me, to be able to provide training opportunities for our staff, we've been seeing some augmented and virtual reality implementations to actually do training with staff for substation installation and maintenance.
Okay, great. And I think this leads into our last poll question here. Just wanted to see from our audience to see if anybody is using 3D to manage their vertical assets right now. So are you currently using 3D to manage your vertical assets? Yeah, so right now, nobody is currently managing in 3D. A few are interested and that may be interested, and 7 are not at this time. So it looks like, I think it's the future that's going to be coming. There's be a lot of new development and new functionality around that, but it's something that's going to be up and coming. We have 2 more questions here from our audience that would like to know about the utility network, and how do you think the transition to the utility network will affect your Cityworks configuration? Becky, do you have any insights there?
So we do have Cityworks customers that are live actually with the utility network currently, and we're also expanding our support for the utility network. And so for existing Cityworks customers, we have utility tools to go through and take. I'm not sure how techy to get on it, but the naming structure and the asset naming does change with the conversion to the utility network. And so with all the historical work activities, we have tools to go through and manage that remapping of the asset naming to the new asset naming, and make sure that not break that relationship with historic work activities. And then we have upcoming functionality that's being developed for further support within the utility network as more functionality is being expanded actually from Esri in terms of more of the utility network functionality being brought through the JavaScript 4X and the runtime, so we can start to develop some tools within the mobile apps as well that will start to leverage that utility network functionality out in the field. And that will support those users out in those plants, power plants, treatment plants, airports, whatever those facilities might be.
Okay, great. Well, I think we're running up on time here, so I think there's a few other questions. We'll reach out to you guys and see if we can provide a written answer. And I hope this session has sparked some thoughts on how you can manage vertical assets with Cityworks and answered some of your questions. The session has introduced you to some, fellow Cityworks users that have been through this before, and they are willing to share their experiences. Also want to thank our panelists. Thank you for your time and attending today and giving all your insights, and then thank you everyone for attending. I do have our contact information of our panelists, so if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to them. Everyone's willing to help and answer questions. And then the final thing I just want to plug is let you know about the Cityworks Innovate Conference is coming up in early June. This is Cityworks Virtual User Conference. The conference provides many informative sessions like this one and allows you to interact with Cityworks staff, users, and business partners. You can sign up at cityworks.com, and I encourage everyone to sign up and attend. And with that, I want to close out today. Thank everyone. Hope everyone has a great day, and thanks again, panelists.